Well, hello. Thank you everybody for coming out today. My name is Rosemary York. I'm going to be talking to you about my thesis, GIS for Ecocultural Resource Management in the Salish Sea, mapping Skokomish tribal hunting and gathering grounds. And before we begin, what is an ecocultural resource? It's a resource that straddles the traditional or conventional lines between a cultural and ecological resource. And so it's used in my project really to honor the biological and sacred cultural roles that plant and animal resources have in Salish communities. And let's get right into it. Ooh, not that one. Here. All right, so I'm gonna go through this list of things today. My research question, project methods. I'm gonna give a really general overview of some of the issues at the intersection of Indigenous resource management and GIS mapping. A very, very brief introduction to the Skokomish tribe, just to contextualize the purpose of the project. And then the project plan, data collection, the results, and a little bit of additional discussion on proposed GIS workflow updates and other takeaways for GIS work with Salish tribes. All right. So I began with kind of a general inquiry about how, what is the appropriate way to be mapping Salish ecocultural resources and approaching those projects. And it developed into this thesis question of how can Skokomish hunting and gathering grounds be appropriately mapped ethically and practically with GIS for rotational harvest management. My methods combined literature review and case study approaches. I began with a theoretical literature review, which dives into that initial general inquiry to better understand the landscape I was getting into. And then next, with the cultural resources staff at the Skokomish tribe, we did purpose development and data planning for the project. I went back and did a localized literature review on the Skokomish tribe, their history, their ecocultural resource management. And then we had data collection to populate the GIS products, product construction, and a little evaluative review from my partners at the tribe. So for context, I want to get into some of those major topics of that theoretical literature review. I found for quite a few reoccurring concerns regarding misuse or misrepresentation of Indigenous knowledge in GIS and other mapping projects. Some key ones are listed here, definitely not all of them. Exploitation. There's a well-documented history of written records of Indigenous geographic knowledge being used by imperialists against Indigenous North Americans to steal their land, their resources, displace and disenfranchise them at large. A good example is that one of the oldest extant maps drawn by an Indigenous North American was created while he was imprisoned by Spanish conquistadors. He was told to locate every tribe that he knew of and then to divulge what precious metal resources they had so that they could then go and use those maps to decide who was the most economically viable to conquer. Maps lie. They are symbology, right? So you're encoding information, and in that process, you have to leave certain stuff out. And in that, again, gives it a rhetorical power about, what is important information, what is not important information, things like that. And then mistranslation. Some forms of Indigenous knowledge can be really difficult to represent with map conventions, which can cause that information to be excluded or kind of misrepresented in the map itself, partially represented, things like that. And then all of these fall under the umbrella of inequity, but I want to specifically raise the issues of equity regarding data control. So a number of notorious studies have collected data from Indigenous folks and only to turn around and either deny them access to that information or to use it to exploit their communities. So it can really disempower Indigenous communities to handle their data carelessly or with prejudice. It's important to ask who is benefiting from the data and what power do Indigenous people have over the information and how it's used. That being said, there are definitely some powerful examples out there of innovating with novel GIS features to more holistically represent Indigenous knowledge, and of Indigenous communities using GIS to address their own priorities, especially in realms like natural resource management, language preservation, and legislative arguments. The Skokomish people are called the Tuaduk in their native language, Tuadukutsad. This referred, if I could talk, this word refers to all the Tuadukutsad speaking people in the Hood Canal Basin. This map shows the majority of their historical territory. There's a little bit missing out of the southwest corner, but for the most part, that's a good representation. And those triangles you see were semi-permanent winter village sites. And they're all spread out over different different streams along the basin. In 1855, the Point-No-Point Treaty between the Tuaduk, Chemakum, and S'Klallam peoples and the governor of Washington forced all these people to relocate to a reservation that's about 5,000 acres down at the mouth of the Skokomish River. It's on that hook. It's at the very bottom curve of that hook, if you don't know where the Skokomish River is. Even back in 1855, during those treaty negotiations, people were worried about how they were going to feed their families with the reservation land. They were told, you can continue to harvest throughout your traditional territory, but unfortunately, that promise has been pretty poorly upheld. Since the signing, things like prejudice, legal apartheid, and property laws have really kept them from reasonably accessing and harvesting native foods. And today, those struggles continue, and there's also new fears regarding resource access and perpetuity due to environmental degradation and climate change. So I approached Skokomish tribal leaders with kind of a blank offer to make a map for their cultural resources department, something that they wanted to have but didn't have the personnel to do. And we came up with this project purpose to track wild harvesting sites for collaborative management activities for the sake of preserving species populations and cultural traditions and monitoring phenological changes in species. Through some discussion about what the software could and couldn't do and what kind of data it could hold and what would be most useful, we decided to collect the following data: harvest locations, resources, which are the particular species, past harvest dates, harvesting or management protocols used by tribal members, and community stories or histories related to the locations or the resources. And then to address some of those concerns mentioned earlier regarding the exploitation of data and community control over data, we had some privacy precautions of transferring all the maps permanently to the tribe's ArcGIS. They're going to get deleted off of my personal account. We're going to I've created a model map for the presentation here, and the documentation that goes into my thesis document. So everything that you see in these maps here is all mock data. It's not the actual data we collected. And then we limited the granularity of harvest locations to avoid documenting exact locations of specific resources. So with the cultural resources staff, I hosted a survey event at the Skokomish Community Center, the goal of which was to lay a data foundation for future record keeping. This was our event poster made by my partner at the tribe. It was a public tribal event where people responded using paper surveys. And the success of this event can really be attributed to the recommendations of the cultural resource manager and her knowledge of community dynamics and what would draw people into the event. Results. So like I mentioned, this wasn't to, we didn't do the surveys to get the data to analyze right now. It was a chance to introduce the project to the community and to get some foundational data to populate these GIS products. Overall, the project goal was to create Esri products for continued data collection and analysis usable by individuals without GIS training. A major part of this work was making sure that these products were going to be able to be used intuitively to facilitate the entire process from recording data to viewing and analyzing it. I came up with a survey for recording new data, a map to contain the records, and a dashboard for viewing and editing that data, which we're going to look at here. So this is just a little screenshot of the survey. It's, sorry, finding my notes. It's really short and straightforward. It's just a form people can scroll through, fill out. It's got some drop-down menus for what species people are harvesting, things like that. So super easy to use. This is the web map, which holds all the information. What you're seeing right now, that layer is symbolized by species. So the different colors represent different resources being harvested in those locations. And again, this is all fake data. The dashboard has 3 pages. One is for viewing data, which you see here. There's some filters, so you can look at, just one species if you want. If you want to look at berries versus greens from the same species, those are options. And then I've got this time bar down at the bottom that can be used to filter out by date. And then you can see a pop-up here, which just, if you click on one of those locations, all the information about the site shows up for you. This is the editing page. This one is really nice. You can click on the shapes and edit them directly in the dashboard. You don't need to go into the GIS, like the nitty-gritty of it. It's all right there. It takes you through the form the same way that the survey does, and is really easy to do. You can also add new features from this page. And then the data view here, this has all the tables. Pulls them up so that they can print them off if they want to look at it in kind of a more aggregated way. That is all here on this guy. So over the duration of this project, I found ways to improve the standard GIS workflow for work with North American tribes based on the literature and on my experiences with the project. This is a standard GIS workflow. It starts with the foundations of figuring out client goals, a needs assessment, which is what you're going to need in terms of data and products to meet those goals, data collection, data management, then creating all the products, the layers and the web maps and the web apps, whatnot. These are my additions down here. So during the client goals phase at the beginning here, it's really beneficial to do some relevant research for the local context. In my work, this was study of the Skokomish tribe and their resource management specifically and conservation challenges. The needs assessment, the next step should really include a discussion of what privacy strategies are necessary for the data you're working with and how the map's perpetuity will be ensured. So, as an example, I read a 2020 McGurk and Card article where they look at 18 different tribal GIS maps from British Columbia. And of those 18, 6 of them are already inaccessible. This is 5 years later, right? So making sure that those maps have a lifespan is really, really important. Data collection benefits from culturally appropriate methods. This is a really broad term, but it's going to look really different depending on what community you're working with and what project you're working on. With this project, we tried to make our survey event more approachable by including food for anyone who would have had to choose between getting dinner and coming to our event. And then we hosted it while other events were going on at the community center to sort of in the moment advertise, and we actually got about half of our participants that way. So these don't always need to be overly complex changes to be effective. They just need to adapt to community values and dynamics. And then I'll touch on it again in a moment, but reflection and adaptation are encouraged in almost all of the relevant literature. This is just an internal or intentional process of reflecting on the execution of your product so far and how well you're meeting your different goals, and then adapting your strategies as necessary to realign your progress with those goals. I found that it fit well for me here in the data management transition, but it could really occur throughout the process. And then at the very end, while you're making the products themselves, you'll want to implement any strategies for cartographically representing unconventional data, and then those privacy and perpetuity plans you make at the beginning. Beyond that, there are some points that were made over and over in the literature that I wanted to bring out. One is data sovereignty, which is key to appropriately conducting research with or data projects with Indigenous peoples. This includes Indigenous communities having ownership of, authority over, control of, access to the data collected from or with them. And then more generally, there are some valuable skills, relationality, which is the fostering and acknowledging of the value of relationships. This just helps build trust with people. More than anything, it helps them want to work with you, and helps deal with some of the tensions that happen in cross-cultural communications and projects. And then reflexivity is, again, that reflecting on the quality of your practice, seeing how it's aligning with the outcomes and the ethical and practical goals you have, and readjusting your path as needed. That is all. Thank you so much. I want to give some special thanks to my reader, Dr. Kevin Francis, to Mike Ruth for helping me with GIS, and to my community partner at the Skokomish tribe, who she wants to remain anonymous, but very thankful for everybody's help.